Dona eis requiem.
And we're back. I don't know about you guys, but I had a turkey sandwich that was absolutely terrible because diet is die with a T, as Garfield says. All right, I'm going to add a little bit more white to the palette. The white I have this problem with, especially as it spreads out and thins, it'll dry. Or not so much dry, it's just there's not enough left to do what I want with it. So I frequently have to refresh the white. Some of these other colors will stay a little longer because they're thicker, but the white is super runny. I don't know if I just got an off bottle or what, but I'm going to mix a little bit more of my light brown color. And it might not be the exact same shade. You can kind of see the coloration. As long as it's close, will be good enough. All right, that ought to do it. Grab the model again. Just look him over real quick. And I think we're gonna switch to the fine detail brush now. So always clean out your brushes. Don't let them sit too long because the paint will dry and then they become more difficult to clean. I think we're done with the big brush. I kind of rearrange everything on the table here. All right, detail brush. That will be this one. Now, these detail brushes a lot of times will come with a tip protector. And I highly recommend you don't lose these and put them on whenever you're done, because it will help that the brush maintain that super sharp point, which the camera doesn't want to focus on, of course. But let's see if I get him in here. Yeah, very, very fine point you can come down to, which is going to be useful for us. So, as always, we're going to wet our brush just a little bit. I'm going to get a teensy bit of this off-white. And when I say a teensy bit, I mean a teensy bit, just ever so barely. We're going to fix his thumb first. So we're in focus. There we go. Doesn't have to be great. That looks pretty good. And then a couple of these little areas where we can see black spots or primer spots shining through, like right here. We're going to clean up because we don't want it to look spotty if we can avoid it. I'm not worried about the eye sockets. Like I said, they're going to be dark either way. Not too worried about underneath the bottom there, as you won't see it very often. Like I said, there's a little spot on his elbow. Let's see if we can get that. There we go. All right, what else? Looks like there's a little bit of primer showing through here on the back of the hip. This model is actually a very simple model. There's not a lot of fine details to paint, which is great. It's a good model to start with because he's not wearing clothes. When you get to clothes, there's a lot of details to paint. Details? I put the emphasis on the wrong syllable there. That was weird. All right. I feel like up underneath on the inside of the joint in the right arm here, there is some, and up underneath the ribs where I failed to get paint earlier. There we go. This pinky finger, let's see if we can fix that. I gotta be careful and not have too much on the brush for this one, or I'll bleed it onto the, oh, I'm off the screen. Sorry, I'll bleed it. Ah, see, okay, this is perfect. I was waiting for the moment I would mess up, and there it is. Good. This is actually great. All right, so you've messed up. We're gonna fix it. First, I'm gonna go ahead and fix this pinky like I wanted to. I brushed off most of my off-white onto the scythe where I didn't want it. These things happen, but it is a learning experience, an opportunity for us here. All right, I'm gonna get a little more paint than that. Okay. Sorry, like I said, working around the camera is tricky. All right. Go around the top of the pinky. See, the back of my paintbrush is hitting the camera. There we go. We needed to do some cleanup with brown anyways. And now or some touch up, some fine details. And so now we'll have some cleanup to do, and we'll even do a little cleanup with the silver. If you're quick though, if you have something to wipe it with, like a little wet cloth, you can actually wipe it off. You gotta be careful though, because your layers are really thin here anyway, so you can wipe off all the layers of paint if you're not careful. Also, if you use something like a paper towel, you can on a rough model like this, it can tear and leave behind fibers, which will just be hairs that'll get painted into your model, which you don't want. It'll be messy. Okay. Overall, I think we're doing pretty good. I don't think we need to do a whole lot of touch up on this particular model. A lot of fine details. Yeah, I think that'll do it. Let's switch to brown. So, real quick. Okay. Wet the brush. And we're going to grab some brown. First, let's fix this. And as you may notice, because we're going over a lighter color with a darker color and it's a little thin, it's still showing through a little bit, so we're going to need to wait for that to dry. Boy, it doesn't want to. There we go. You can see it's still showing through a little bit, so we're going to need to wait for that to dry. While it does, let's do some other touch-up areas, like this little indent right here. Oof, that's really small. I gotta be careful not to bleed. That'll do. And you can see down here our first and only layer of brown didn't quite cover up some of this white. So we're going to want to do a whole nother layer on that. Just so it doesn't look splotchy. See, this is already mostly dried. I'm going to take it off camera for a second and blow on it. There you go. That's mostly dried. So now we can come back over it. A little more brown. We may need to do one more little layer after that. After that dries, we'll see. On the inside of the thumb, where I painted the thumb, we need to clean up a little bit. Looks like I bled over onto the finger a little there. Sometimes it is just kind of back and forth, and that's okay. Let's look at the back. Back looks all right. I'm not going to mess with it anymore. All right, let's fix the silver on the scythe. Clean off my tip. Don't absolutely crush your brush when you're squeezing it like this. Just enough to kind of press out the moisture, but you don't want to pull out the hairs. So be careful with that. All right. Now, silver. Just a second here, let me blow it again. This will take a couple of coats to go over probably. And like I said, because it takes a while to dry, that'll take a minute. I'm going to switch back and forth. Realistically, I would just wait. But I'm going to switch back over to brown real quick. Because this is dry now. Dry enough. We should be able to get the final coat on this little spot where you can see the white coming through. And after this, it will hopefully not be nearly as noticeable. And maybe one more down here on these lighter areas. A lot of this will be covered up and forgiven by the shade that we're going to use. I think that that's pretty good. Do not want to focus real close on it. We're almost to my favorite part. One more. Because we're going to switch back over to white real quick. Do one last piece of cleanup with the off-white. And that is where I bled onto the finger right here. And now, did you see what just happened there? I don't know. No, it wasn't clear. I had so much water on my brush that the second I touched it, it sucked the paint and the water right off the brush. You got to be careful with that. It looks okay. It's close enough, small enough that I'm gonna leave it be. But it can suck the water and paint into areas you don't want, little crevices and things. All right. One last run at silver, and I'm actually going to not use water this time on the brush. I'm going to get the brush somewhat dry because this silver is already very liquidy. All right. There we go. That's looking better. That's looking less like a mess up. Okay, good. I think that with that, I'm going to call detailing done for this guy. It likes to flip in and out of autofocus. So that's pretty much it. That's the base level and the layers. He doesn't have a whole bunch of different colors, so this wasn't difficult. A model with clothing or something where you go back and forth with 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different colors, it's a lot more work. It takes a long time. I think the longest model I painted took about 8 hours. Obviously multiple sessions. But this guy, I mean, you can slap him together pretty quick. Yeah, I think it looks good. All right, we are going to move on to my favorite face. Set him to the back. As always, wash out your detail. Wash out any brush you use. And especially, I take good care of these detail brushes. So, one more time just to be thorough. I'm just kind of reshaping the brush down to a point again by twirling it against my finger lightly. I want to keep that very sharp point that the brush has that it won't focus on, but it's a very, very fine point. Yep. Put my brush guard back on. All right. Washing. Let me get the wash out real quick. Sorry for the delay. I should have had this out already. Maybe I'll cut this and edit later. We'll see. All right. So Agrax Earthshade is a dark brown wash. For this, I don't really need my palette out right now. So what I'm going to do is find the lid. Put it on there to keep it nice and moist. Snap, 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 snap. All right. Here's one thing I love about Citadel paints and washes. They have these great, really tightly sealing caps that snap on. When you first get them, you have to break the seal, but when you lift it, this little ridged part comes apart, but it's still totally sealed. I've never had them leak. And they come with this really nice, you shake them up to mix them real well. They come with this really nice little feeder kind of lip that you get your paint or your wash off of. Oh, this was a new bottle. That's right. I forgot. All right. Be real careful there. And so they have this little feeder area that you can pull the paint or the wash from, this right up here. And if I need more, I'll dip it and then brush along the side here. So I'll go down, dip into it, and then brush it out until I get a lot more up here. And then I'll work from this little pool, this little reservoir right here, which is fantastic. All right, this is, and I hope this goes well on my 3D painted version, but this is the most miraculous transformation for me while painting minis. I love watching this happen. So before I do it, I think this guy looks great. I think he looks totally usable as a tabletop mini. It's certainly, in my opinion, he's better than just a plain plastic mini. He has a little more character to him. If you're putting him out there, it's very clear what he is and what he's holding. And so the base level is fine, but we're going to apply wash. We're going to get it pretty liberally on the brush, and we're just going to spread it around everywhere. And what happens here is you have wash or a shade like this is just paint suspended in a lot of water, and it's mixed really finely. It's super smaller particles, so they will run down into all the cracks and crevices and create dark areas, basically shadows. So you're doing kind of almost the opposite of highlighting. You're doing shading, as they call it. So here we go. Now it's going to tend to want to pool up heavily, and if it's too thick, you want to kind of brush it out a bit. And as you see, obviously, it's taken him from a very bright white to a darker shade, almost a brown. But it will dry lighter than it's going on. So you see now, one eye has got it down in it and one does not. So they see that already brings the feature out in that eye, which is great. For really fine details, I like to get, like the face, I like to get a little bit off the brush first before I run over those areas, so I don't get just a giant blob in them. So I'll go over a bigger area like the ribs or an arm or leg, and then when the brush is a little drier, a little less full, I'll go over the face details. But the great part here is, unless you have a model, let's say maybe that's wearing chainmail, plate armor or whatever, and you don't want to get this brown wash on it, you want to get black wash on it, unless that's the case, you can just put this everywhere. We're going to go over the entire model here. I'm even going to go over the scythe, because for me, my thinking is that lore-wise, this scythe is probably as old as this guy is. It's old and rusty and worn, and so if it's a little reddish brown or whatever, that is fine. That makes sense. Wash is not going to do a lot for you on very large flat areas. You're not going to see it as much, and it's gonna run off. So it's not really going to affect the scythe a whole lot. You see it get down in between the toes there and really start to define the toes. There's an area where I may do a little heavier, and this is just a single coat. You can come back later, do another coat, and he will darken up those areas even more. You can just pay attention to areas that should be shadowed, like the ribs up underneath the chest, armpits, the folds of like cloak and armor and things, if you have those areas where it should be darker. Now you saw there, I go around the base of the foot, there's little areas where there's still white peeking out maybe, and this is going to help blend the transition between the white areas and the black of the base. As long as you're close, this will really be very forgiving about that transition. And this little bottle, I've never run out. I gave away the one I had recently, and it was still probably 3/4 full or more. And I've done dozens and dozens of models with it. I did a custom paint job of a spaceship from Star Wars, a YT-1300, like the Millennium Falcon, called the Crate Fang. And because the overall paint color of the ship was dark, like rusty burnt orange, This was a very good complementary wash for it, and it made just a huge difference. I may link that a screenshot of that real fast here. All right, now we're doing the back ribs. So like, just to pause for a second here, you can see just the stark difference between, and now under here, it is really highlighting how rough this model is and how kind of cruddy it is. But, you know, here's your white skeleton. Here's a much more detailed skeleton, in my opinion. Looks much better. Get the arm on the front here. See, there's a little crevice that should be a little darker probably. So I'll maybe put a little extra in there. Now, if you're painting a bigger model with bigger crevices that are really smooth, you got to be aware gravity works, and this is very wet and runny. And if you get enough, it is going to run. It's going to run down. If I put a huge glob here, you know, it would run down the spine, whatever. So just be aware of that. It's going to pull in whichever direction down is. So if you want it to pull this way, that's fine. But if you hold the model this way, it's going to pull towards the front. So just be aware of that as you do it. Like for instance, if you wanted to pull it up underneath the armpits, you might want to hold the model this way for a little while until it dries. And it dries fairly quickly as well because it's very thin and you're doing a thin layer, and at room temperature that water is going to evaporate out, leaving behind just the paint pretty quickly. Yeah, after reading a bunch of mini painting forums, there's some good ones on Reddit. Multiple people told me this, and I'd seen it written many times before, that this is like the secret tool in a lot of mini painters' arsenals, especially for beginners. It doesn't require any skill to apply because you're generally just going to put it everywhere, and it makes a huge difference between a simply base painted model. And the next step that we'll do after this is called dry brushing, and it will make another huge difference, which you'll see. And I'm not sure how well it's going to come out on a 3D printed model that's got a bunch of layer lines that are rough, but we'll see. Let's get the side of the head here. And under his chinny chin. I've often wondered if realistically, if I wanted on the whole model like this guy, if I had a big enough cup of it, or if I made my own wash, could I just dunk the guy in it upside down, take him out, shake it a few times, and let him dry? I don't know. Like, speed painting wise, that might be like super fast. Like, if I wanted to speed paint a ton of skeletons, I would make a big batch of the off-white, and I would just paint the whole model, everything, even the scythe. And then I would come back through, detail the scythe, and then I could maybe dunk them in a wash, or just quickly brush it over with a much bigger brush. And that would be a fast way to do this, probably. You needed a whole skeleton army. But I like doing one at a time. I don't mind. Here, let's see if we can get a little more into the crevices of the fingers joints there to kind of call that out. We'll go across them this way. Yeah, that didn't have much on it. And you really start to see the lines there. Same with the back ribs here. They're not very pronounced. So we're going to do the spine. And I'm grabbing like almost full droplets and kind of dropping the droplets onto the model and letting them run through the lines like this. I'm letting gravity do its job. Maybe there we go. That's good. And now this is more spine technically, although it's real thick, you know, just to give the model stability. And then we'll like we may have missed a little bit on the arm here. So one of the things we'll do in a minute is we'll want to go over it and see if we have any really bright white spots peeking out at us. Up underneath here, I know it's hard to see an angle on this, but basically under the butt, I'm gonna put it on a little thicker because that area would be dark. Now I've started to run out on this little top area, so I'll dip and slide. How's like a dance move to put much more up here. And now I can grab it and really lay it in here. All right, I'm gonna have to turn him like this way for a minute to let it pool and dry. And it's always good to get different angles on him to make sure you didn't miss something. From a different angle, you may see more. This starts to come into needing kind of a little bit of an eye artistically, and kind of knowing, okay, where would the shadows be and where would the highlights be if this was a real, a physical skeleton. I mean, it is a physical object you're painting, so technically you could put a high light above it, just get like a little spotlight or something, or flashlight, shine it down on it and see where the shadows are, see where the dark areas are. Underneath, like I said, underneath the bottom, the back of the legs, the feet, to some extent, depending on how they're posed, those are all going to be darker because they have other parts of the body above them, so they should be darker. So yeah, like I was saying, you want to start making the areas darker that would be darker, where light would get less. Areas that have objects above them. My camera hit its video size limit, it told me. I'm not sure. We'll see how that goes. So, but yeah, areas that are kind of hidden from view, if you had a light on top of it, you might want to make it a little darker. That's a bit much right there. But I'll typically make the foot joints a little darker and the feet. All right, maybe gonna do just a teensy bit more in these ribs to really call that out. And then up underneath the shoulder blades should be kind of dark, I think, because they're hidden from light. The mouth area I typically want to darken a little bit. And then this guy's nose didn't print really. So we get many kind of fake it. We don't want him to look like Rudolph though, so I'm going to brush this off a bit and then spread that a bit. See, I got too much on my brush now. I want to thin that out on the face before it dries really darkly. And lastly, up underneath the chin, ought to be kind of darker. So we're just calling out the darker areas. And when we do dry brushing, we'll be calling out the brighter areas. We'll do the staff here a little bit. Up underneath the rib cage should be darker. And with each successive layer you do, if you let it dry, it'll get a little darker, a little darker, a little darker. Try to stay away from doing too much on areas that will be brighter and lighter. For instance, the top of the head is going to be very light. The top of the staff, or scythe, sorry, is going to be pretty light. Top of the shoulders, maybe the top of the knee, the top of this hand and this hand. Those areas are gonna need highlights. They're gonna be brighter because as light shines down on him, that's they would, you know. But I think we're pretty well done with our application of our wash. And if you find any areas that you're like, well, no, that needs a little bit more, you just go back and do them. It's not hard. Maybe make this a little bit darker in the middle. There we go. And this little part of the shoulder. It just takes, and there's, I've done a lot of these, so there's a little bit of trial and error here, I guess. And I'm just kind of familiar with what I'm doing, so. Now, top of the head, I don't want to be too dark, but up underneath the back of the skull, there'd be a little bit of shade. And underneath the shoulder blades here in the back, maybe. A little bit of shade. A little bit extra shade. All right. He's looking good. I think we're about to call him done for shading. And that next step, like I said, that next step will be dry brushing, which is going to be highlighting instead of shading. Now, it's a bit thick right there. So I could dry the brush over here or on a paper towel, and you can suck a little bit back out. The brush will kind of grab it. Let's go over the scythe once and just see what happens. See, I'm afraid it's just going to pull out the lines. It's not doing a whole lot. It's not really obvious. I didn't think it would be because it's such a flat object. But maybe remove just a teensy bit of the shine from it because we don't want it to be too shiny. Yeah, maybe a little bit more on the front. There we go. That's starting to look pretty good, right? Still rough, of course, but it's a little bit too bright back here on the skull. Okay. All right. I'll keep nitpicking at it forever, I think, if I don't stop myself at some point. All right. I've got to let this dry. This takes a little longer, obviously, than the acrylic paint to dry because it is so much water. I don't know, 50%, 70%, 80%. It's a lot more water, a lot more liquidy. And so before we move on to dry brushing, we've got to let this fully dry. I would say it certainly would be dry probably within an hour unless you went real heavy, like in the deepest areas. And it might be even faster. And as always, drying times depend on things like, you know, humidity and temperature and airflow in the area that you're in. So if you're in Seattle, it might take a lot longer to dry, but if you're in Arizona, you know, you might put this in a windowsill or something and it might be dry in minutes. All right, let's always cap this as soon as you're done because, boy, it'll spill and run like you wouldn't believe if you dump it. Push down real hard, it'll snap. Just make sure you got a good seal all the way around, and it's completely watertight. And it's I love these little containers; they're great. Now, let's look at our guy here. Looking better, looking a lot more skeleton-y. As I said, we're not going to be able to get the smoothness of the injection model, but hopefully we'll be able to get the coloring of it. And we're getting much closer now. Oh yeah, that's looking great. All right. We'll take a break, let them dry, and then we'll come back and do dry brushing.